Hello, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which I stand, these being the Jagera and Turrbal peoples. I would also like to offer my respects for the elders, past, present, and emerging. This digital story aims at exploring the visibility of First Nations peoples, cultures, viewpoints, and country in my local environment. Walking around my neighbourhood, being limited due to this pandemic, I noticed rows of houses, trees, scattered parks and shops. I panicked at the thought of capturing what I felt a lacking visual of First Nations peoples. What value is really being placed if every rock is to be uncovered to find something that connects to First Nations peoples? Where is the symbolism or acknowledgement of those who came before us, of those who are so interconnected to this land and have been, for as some researchers claim, over 400,000 years? For the world's oldest civilization, with an estimated 250 languages, isn't it a wonder that there are limited modern-day representation? I turn to the other resource I have, media. What do I see? If there is any mention of First Nations peoples, it appears negative, infrequent, seemingly framed to be marketed towards the dominant groups in our societies. An easy digest, offering little provocation to challenge the way we live our lives. Media outlets promote an ever-present deficit paradigm, perpetuating discrimination, stigma, social exclusion, and injustice. Authored by non-Indigenous, dominant and privileged members of society. I witnessed this in the First Nations people's parliamentary representation and further evidence through each annual Bridge the Gap report. Our nation acts to help the disadvantaged, assuming an inherent fault, instead of helping to prevent disadvantage through public awareness, policy, morality, and practice. I try to hold a tone of humility when I enter into this topic. My education in the past painted the picture that colonization was quick, and if it weren't for our history, we wouldn't be where we are today. How white grief with racism, a new term I am becoming familiar with, consumes me. To hear that my own distant family acted as officers on colonial ships, I feel torn, wanting to stop hearing and wanting to immerse myself further to avoid any act of racism leaving blood on my own hands. The pain and the suffering is real, although it is not just my own. It is ongoing and very real for many people. It is ignorant for society to assume pain only lives in the past. Moving away from controlled mediums, instead I prefer to become intimately aware of our natural world, our country. For country to Indigenous peoples is not a textbook definition. Instead, it is the cornerstone of what encompasses First Nation people's identity. To disconnect the two, country and identity, is foreign, unnatural, yet following colonization, this has become the norm. I now question how systematically driven my education had been in shaping my understanding of Western history, more accurately described as invasion, and the 150-year battle to resist invasion. The perception of First Nations peoples and our shared history have been purposefully and socially determined by dominant groups, which I learned further perpetuates disadvantage and in turn ensures dominant groups remain in privilege. Perhaps this is why I struggle to find sound representation. These dominant and privileged groups further social injustice by determining what is relevant versus irrelevant, civilized versus uncivilized, superior versus inferior, always acting the judge, jury, author, and storyteller. It goes against fundamental human rights to harbour such control. Instead of enabling disconnection and social injustice, we should aim to reconnect and promote social equity, to step away from blaming and instead acknowledge the complex socio-historical and economic factors that influence First Nation people's lives. Let us become informed to step out to promote social inclusion.